Hi there, it's Ian here, and you're watching Grumpy Opinions, the show where I'm going to tell you all about what I think of films, TV shows, games, and life in general. Let's get on with the show. Outlander is the Starz TV show about Jamie and Claire Fraser, their daughter Bree, her boyfriend Roger, and a few other people all currently milling around 18th century North Carolina. And before I get into this week's episode, I'd just like to say that actually last week's episode was incredibly controversial. I've been really amazed by the amount of people who've actually come and visited the video, the amount of people who took the time to actually comment and to talk with me about various things in the comment section, also people who talk to me on Twitter. It's been really fascinating and interesting. I mean, I don't think this week's going to be quite as controversial, but anyway, just if you stopped by and you talked to me about it, thanks. Let's get on with the show. Episode 8, Wilmington, which is the 50th episode of the show as it turns out, starts off with Claire and Jamie going for a wee visit to see Parsley and Fungus and their wee baby Jermaine. And I couldn't think of a food name, sorry. Sorry everyone, sorry. Anyway, they stop by to say hello and Claire and Marsley have a little "aren't kids lovely and you die to protect your kids" chat, and then later on that night they're off to a fancy pants sort of trip to the theatre, and it's to see some strange play and then rub shoulders with nobility because Governor Tryon's there and he introduces them to his mate Mr. Fanning, and he seems like a nice enough chap, but he's got a bit of a tummy complaint, and Claire tries to give him advice, but she's totally shushed by Tryon, who takes up Fanning and Jamie away to talk about man stuff. And Claire's left with the wife and gets introduced to George Washington. No, really, it's George Washington. But she can't help but make an arse of herself by mentioning chopping down cherry trees, and that goes down like a lead balloon. Anyway, once the play starts, everything seems fine. And Tryon mentions that he's got a spy in the regulator camp and he's going to arrest them all, and the ringleader, a guy called Murtaugh Fitzgibbons. And of course, Jamie isn't happy about that, but he can't really do anything because he's in the theatre, stuck right in the middle of the aisle beside Governor Tryon and Fanning. But he has an idea though, so he accidentally punches Fanning in his hernia, causing him lots of pain, and then calls for Claire, saying that she has to operate on him. And then during the commotion of the surgery, he sneaks off and he hitches a lift to town with George and Martha. And then he ditches them, but he manages to get back and gets word to Murtaugh that through the medium of Fergus, who stops him just in the nick of time, allowing the cart to pass by and the trap to be avoided. And on the way home, Tryon tells Jamie and another pal that the ambush failed, but between them, they realise that the only person who was actually noticed leaving was Washington, meaning Jamie's still in the good books of Tryon, and he's out of suspicion, but he may have actually just dropped George Washington in it. Meanwhile, on the same day, Roger's made it to Wilmington, and he's been asking around with the drawing of Bree, and he's getting nowhere, and he's spilling his pint on it as a result, but luckily he then randomly bumps into her in the inn, and then they have a big hug, but then they go outside to chat, and Lizzie sees them through the window, and his sort of semi-psychotic grabbiness, so then they scoot off and they have a bit more of a chat in a random building, and then they decide that they actually do love each other, and they want to be married, so they have a wee hand-fasting ceremony, and then they get down to naked time stuff. And after that, they're having a bit of pillow talk, and of course, Roger, being a total idiot, blurts out they actually knew about the obituary but hadn't told her. And then he starts talking about how, she's his wife, maybe she should listen to him. Say what now? So of course, Bree just tells him to piss off home if he's going to be an arse. And then they end up storming off their separate ways, which seems to be kind of a habit with the pair of them. Only for Bree to go back into the inn and bump into Bonnet, and he's playing cards, and she notices that he actually has Claire's Jamie ring, and then she offers to buy it off him, and he ushers her through into a side room to negotiate. But once they're in there, it's clear that he doesn't actually want money in exchange for the ring, he wants her. So when she says no, he attacks her, and the rest of his pirate crew just kind of sit in the other room while it happens, ignoring her screams. Then afterwards, true to his twisted word, Bonnet gives her the ring, and then Bree shakily goes back upstairs to her room. Yikes. So what did I think? Well, this episode was apparently the 50th episode of Outlander, as I said before, and that's pretty impressive if you ask me, because it also means that I've done 50 Outlander reviews now, and also, I've now just peaked over 500 subscribers, so go you guys, you're all awesome. I mean, that really means an awful lot to me, and I really hope that you're enjoying the channel and the stuff that I make, and long may it continue. But anyway, this week I thought it was really interesting because we got to see Parsley and Fungus again. I mean, even though it was only briefly, but it was nice, to actually see them. And it was good to see Marsley and Claire having a bit of a sort of mumsy chat. Although that's pretty much what they did before, but it seems to be a nice thing to have. And it's good to see her on screen. And the same with Fergus, it's actually good to see him doing stuff. And it was a really interesting choice to have him going off and meeting up with Murtaugh, seeing as they haven't really had any FaceTime since the morning of Culloden, when Fergus went off with the Fraser folk and Murtaugh went off to join Jamie in the battle. And it was cute that, they managed to work in George Washington and Martha as well. I mean, I really like the fact that Jamie's presence and actions have now potentially put Washington in trouble because, they've pointed him out as being a potential troublemaker. So maybe that's actually going to influence Washington's action, and that might actually lead to the War of Independence. You know how Claire and Jamie's actions to try and originally stop Culloden, but then to try and help it actually be won, ended up basically making everything turn out the way it did. It could be this way as well. It could be that they've become instrumental in the War of Independence just by accident. And it was a nice wee subtle nod, and it's quite fun. And it's also really sweet to see Roger and Bree doing stuff like the hand fasting. I mean, that's a real thing that people do. I mean, it's quite popular in Scotland these days. I think I've been to like 5 weddings or civil partnerships in the last 10 years where that was actually part of the ceremony. So I mean, it was really cute to see it done on screen. And like, and all the usual commendations of the show, because I mean, it looked absolutely lovely, and like the theatre looked absolutely awesome. It was really cool. I kind of wish we'd actually spent more time in that theatre place, but then at the same time, it's a shame, and that brings me on to things that actually bugged me. Okay, to start with, and this might seem like a really weird nitpick, but you know, the theatre, like the theatre aside from actually the room with the stage on it itself, right? That's the Signet Library in Edinburgh, and it's a place because I've been to it a couple of times because they hold like events in it and stuff, and it gets used on films and TVs all the time. And it really stuck out to me, in part probably because I watched a couple of nights ago a film called The 12th Man, and I had a bit shot there where it was like standing in as some kind of big Nazi Hitler building during World War II. But anyway, it stuck out to me on this massively because it's exactly the same place that they shot the Governor's Ball in during season 3. Now, I mean, I know that's Jamaica and this is North Carolina, and maybe there weren't that many architects going around that did slightly different designs, but it stuck out to a sore thumb to me that that was exactly the same place. I mean, I know they put a lot of effort into these things, but sometimes it feels like maybe they're running short on ideas a little bit. Because I mean, it was like the dinner scene at Triumph's house, like earlier in the season. I mean, that was very similar to like the bit in season 2 when they were, having dinner with French people and back then, and it looked like the same shot. It might not have been the same set or even the same building, but it kind of felt like it was shot all exactly the same and looked awfully samey. Now, I mean, it could be that it's just things are getting a little unadventurous. I mean, we're 4 seasons in, so there's some things are going to end up happening over and over again. And it was still nice, but don't get me wrong, but I mean, yeah, it just felt that way. Also, during that scene, I see we're back to like Claire just being silently a bit cross at ye olde sexism again. And I get that that would be totally annoying for her, because I mean, she has had 20 years of being a doctor and working hard for it like, through the 1950s and 1960s in Boston, which was probably quite a sexist place in and of itself. But I feel like after a few years, because it's supposed to be like 1769 or something now, you feel like Claire might be a little bit more used to it. I mean, she might be just a wee bit more kind of understanding that she's in a different time and maybe, she needs to adapt to those times. So, like, when Tryon's like saying to her, we need a surgeon. I feel like she would have had a coping mechanism. Like she would have known something to say. Like she could have said like, "Oh, but I used to be a surgeon during the war," or she could have said something like, "Yeah, I used to be like the assistant to Bonnie Prince Charlie's personal surgeon," or something like that. I mean, because it's not like anyone's going to check, but instead it's just a case of her just going, "I'm a surgeon," and then Jamie going, "She's a surgeon," and then people just eventually going, "Oh, all right," and then at the end they're impressed because she's done something. And we've had that whole thing of her doctoring in front of a disbelieving man who ends up impressed by her at the end a few times now. In fact, it happens a couple of times every single season. And frankly, it's getting a wee bit dull now. I mean, it would be more of a shock if the guy had actually died on the table or something, or hell, if an alien had popped out. And this is something that I feel like the show falling back on stuff that it's done before and a little bit too much. And I said stuff about this in, like, I think it was episode 2 or 3, about how we're hitting familiar Outlander beats again. I mean, and this episode had more than a couple of moments like that. And you end up just watching very predictable TV. I mean, the very second that Fanning started like talking about his hernia and gripping his side, I was like, right, so clearly Claire's going to end up having to fix that at some point in the episode. And although it was like, it was being used for an interesting reason, like Jamie needing a distraction, it felt kind of obvious. I mean, it would even have been better if, like, after Jamie had done it, if she'd said, "Oh, Jamie, he might die now because, you shouldn't have done that," rather than, of course, her turning around and saying, "Well, actually, probably you saved his life by punching him in his hernia and making it sore, and now that means I have to have emergency surgery in this dirty, unsterile house using inferior tools instead of actual surgical equipment that I brought from the future." I mean, come on, that's safer than him maybe just, having a bit of a sore hernia for a while. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it just seemed awfully convenient. And but then again, was there any expectation that Claire wouldn't have saved him? I mean, it just seems like the kind of thing where that doesn't really happen. I mean, or also that Jamie's actions might have ever led anywhere other than sorting things out. I mean, it's just a little bit, a bit obvious and a bit, the good guys are going to win and we know they're going to win, so why even worry about it? And pacing's a thing, because I mean, there was interesting pacing in this, and you had 3 storylines running at the same time in this episode. You had the theatre storyline, you had the wagon robbery, and you had Bree and Roger. And the problem is that I think sometimes the way that they fit together was a bit strange, because with the Murtaugh thing, I mean, him and his regular dudes, I mean, I'm sure they hung about for hours, like before they actually tried to make a move on the wagon and before it arrived. But the show really made us feel it by spacing out scenes of them all the way through everything else. And so it felt a little bit strange because clearly, like, that guy had gone up to the wagon and he'd been chatting to the guy for a while, and then all this chat goes with like Murtaugh and Rupert, and then it suddenly cuts back to him and he says,
"May I help you?"
which you think that surely that's the first thing you're going to say to the guy. It's not going to be like something you said after the middle of a conversation. And he didn't say it in a way like, anyway, can I help you? So I just wonder if that was an editing issue, or maybe that was the only thing they'd shot, the guy actually replying to him or something, and it just seemed a bit strange. But anyway, part of that pacing feeling could be because these storylines were a bit disparate. Because, I mean, we had Claire and Jamie's theatre surgery stuff, and as I said, I just didn't buy into that as any kind of tension. So, and then you had Murtaugh and Co out in the woods, and that actually did seem a bit tense because you were worried that, were they actually going to get there in time, or were they actually going to, was there going to be a big fight or something? Was there going to be a big action sequence? And then on the Bree and Roger something, it suddenly like drops a gear, and it's like, them being romantic-y and then bumping uglies and then having a big argument in the shed. And that's one of the aspects of this episode that bugged me a lot. And I hate to say it, but I think the show has completely killed Roger as a character for me. Like, in seasons 2 and 3, he seemed like quite a sweet, clever, nice guy, awfully intelligent, but genuinely a nice, lovely, sweet guy. But this season, he's a total arse. I mean, literally. I mean, he swings from being Mr. Nice and Lovely to absolute grumpy, pig-ignorant moron in every other scene. I mean, here's the problem. It's kind of the show and tell thing that, you've probably heard me talk about before, and it's like a big thing in films and TV. Because Outlander showed us in season 3 that there was something between Roger and Bree, because we saw them, like, hanging out and dating and stuff, and it was clear they liked each other. But now it showed us that any time that sex and intimacy involved, Roger turns into a total arsehole. And it's telling us that Bree loves him and that, that he's really a lovely guy. But the problem is, I don't really believe it anymore. I mean, hell, Bonnet might be a creepy, psycho, rapey guy, but at least he actually is open about it. Now, I'm at the point where I'm starting to think that Roger is actually a creepy, controlling psycho and without ever anyone actually knowing about it. And that he clearly has no actual real respect for women at all. And he's clearly got a need to control Bree. And that's what the show has showed me. And that's the problem. I don't care if he's crossed time and continents for her, because he's clearly not a healthy person for her to be going out with as a boyfriend or as a husband. And maybe she's just too young to see it. And that's what the show has showed me. And what the show showed me is going to be in my mind what it's told me every single time. There was also a bit of a clunkiness to that big argument between Bree and Roger. I mean, in one way, I wasn't surprised that they mentioned on the post snippet show from the producers, that's at the end, that's sometimes on YouTube.
After obviously their handfast, they get in that big fight. Roger blurts out that he knew about the obituary. It's really difficult to figure out a reason why Roger would leave her. There were a lot of people in the room that felt that was not a cool thing to do, and we just did talk about ways to escalate the fight.
Being one of the males in the room, you go, would I leave the woman I love without knowing that she had some ability to get home?
She just traveled through 200 years by herself.
and welcome to the writer's room.
I mean, it looks like they were disagreeing in the writing room, and it kind of felt constructed in the way that Roger's like, what he's saying is clearly is like the worst things he could say that are most definitely going to piss off Bree. And the fact is, you would think he would know that. You think he would have actually thought about what he was going to say to her in the months it would have taken him to get there. And the fact that he's, being all grabby and weird with her felt strange and overplayed and a bit out of character. I mean, that's part of the thing with the scene with Lizzie seeing Bree and Roger. I mean, maybe I missed something in previous episodes, but I don't ever remember Roger like dragging Bree by the hand like that, or being, basically like a flaming caveman or something. I mean, it was clunky and it was unnatural. And in some ways, I mean, I presume this is set up for something later, because the whole scene here reminded me a bit of the film Atonement. And if you've never seen Atonement, you should totally watch it, honestly. If you like Outlander, you're going to absolutely love Atonement. But in that, like, wee Saoirse Ronan, like, sees James McAvoy and Keira Knightley, and she doesn't understand what's going on with them. And that leads to her misunderstanding the nature of their relationship. And then, let's just say that there are some other similar story beats in the film that kind of reminded me a bit of this episode. So I'm curious to see if the show ends up panning out in a similar fashion to that film. I mean, because it could be, and if it is, that's pretty shocking. But in Atonement, it made sense because we were looking at a very young kid looking at a couple of like 20-somethings interacting, but totally without context and not really understanding what was going on. But whereas here, we're watching two people who are a couple and him being just really, really grabby and just horrible, and her just going along with it, which seems out of character for her. But it's like almost like he needs to act in that way to really sell Lizzie, like assuming that he's a bad guy. And again, I presume that's a setup for later, but it was so badly done that I just didn't buy it. Also, when was it made clear that Roger waited ages to tell Bree about like the obituary? I mean, nothing about the show made it clear that he'd waited a long time. I mean, I assumed that he'd called her as soon as he was back in Oxford. I mean, sure, you could argue that maybe he should have actually just called from the manse the minute that, like, Fiona had showed him the obituary. But there wasn't really an implication that it had been a long time on that episode. Or if there was, I mean, I don't remember that, and I never really understood that from when watching it. So, I mean, why tell her that? Why not just tell her that, yeah, you'd seen the obituary, and then you tried to tell her, but she'd already left. And then, after he chased after her, she'd time travelled and stuff, so he had to come after her because he was worried about it. I mean, that's all technically true, but the clock needed them to fall apart, so it ended up so that she would go off and get raped by Bonnet, and it was just all awfully convenient. Like she literally says to him, "Oh, but then you found out after I'd left," and he's like, "No, no, no, it was before," and I was like, "What?" But I mean, it just felt like silly convenience plotting, much like everything else in this sort of bit in this scene. I mean, similarly, Bonnet just happening to wave the ring in her face as she passes by, and then the innkeeper. Like you see that there's an innkeeper in the inn, and she's a paying customer in his inn. She's got the room upstairs, and he totally ignores that this is happening. I mean, it's loud enough that everyone in there can clearly hear it because there's some dodgy looks between all the pirates and stuff, and they used to sit there, pottering along playing cards and stuff. But you think the innkeeper at least would have actually gone, come on, don't do this. And then as to the actual sexual assault portrayal, I'm kind of in two minds of it. It's like what they did in that one episode of Game of Thrones. Yeah, have a drink. I mentioned Game of Thrones. Anyway, where Sansa, she got raped on her wedding night, and the camera just, instead of showing what was happening, it just kept stucking on the guy Theon, who was standing in the corner of the room crying. Instead of it showing it. But that got a lot of complaints because it was saying that it was reduced the impact of the scene, or it made the scene more about him rather than what was happening to her. And to an extent, I can understand that. And this sort of did something a bit similar because it was about pirates picking their teeth and playing cards while it happened. But I didn't really want to see it in any case. And I feel like by not seeing it though, while it does, it still has an impact. In some ways, it lessens our dislike of cheeky wee Aragon because we've not actually seen him doing it. We know he's done it, so it's still real in that. But in some ways, I don't know. I wonder if it'll really affect me. I couldn't, as soon as it happened, I couldn't really in my head just go, yeah, well, that happened because, it just didn't sit as real for me. Unlike Blackjack, where we actually watched half an episode of him torturing and assaulting Jamie. But then it could also be that since there was a big chunk of this episode was all sort of romantic-y sex stuff, maybe it would have left a bad taste in the mouth. So I don't know. Two minds about that. Still, this is a week where a lot happened, and while I suspect it won't be quite as controversial as last week, wow. Last week was really controversial, and there were so many opinions about it, and that was really ace, and I like to hear what people think, and I want to hear what people think about this week as well. But I feel like, this week we really actually got into the swing of proper plot stuff kicking off. We're moving into a new kind of bit of the show now, because, things have to change, because presumably Bree's going to meet up with Mum and Dad next week, and who knows what else is going to happen. So, at least until next week, I'd like to wish you all the very best over Christmas or the holiday season. If you don't do Christmas in your house. But anyway, I want you all to have an absolutely lovely time. So until next week, Merry Christmas, and these have been my grumpy opinions.